welcome to the second episode of our investigative marketing series, Into the Funnel. If you're coming to us from our first episode on long-term marketing growth, welcome back. I'm Lauren Smith, Editor-in-Chief of Springboard, studioID's content marketing publication. And as always, I'm joined by our marketing experts, Lieu Pham, VP of Global Strategy here at studioID, and Travis Gonzalez, Strategy Director at studioID.
So today's topic is actually on B2B creativity. When it comes to that topic, marketers often get accused of playing it too safe or not challenging the status quo. So that's what we're discussing today.
And to help us dive into this creativity problem, we wanted to bring along Kate Light, who's a content director at studioID. Kate helps brands develop that content that really hits the balance between what your audience cares about and those key industry trends. And she does it for one of the most, niche business verticals out there, construction and utilities. So really excited to have you here, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
I think this is a very age-old response, but it's hyper-competition. In today's kind of content marketing climate especially, everyone is trying to essentially keep up with the Joneses, which has created this really hyper-competitive space where everyone wants to talk about the latest and greatest conversation. Everyone wants to reach the same type of B2B buyers. And what happens is you're trying to balance between being really specific with what those buyers are trying to learn about and investigate around your product.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you, Travis. And I would add to that the cultural issue as well. And some B2B organizations, in my experience, are very dominated by the sales team, right? Which means marketing often acts as an extension of sales, which of course means that there's a preference towards demand gen, products and solutions rather than brand building and creative storytelling. And you need both, but when there's a really strong sales agenda, I find that creativity often gets lost or watered down. And of course, that's not great.
Yeah, those are really good points. When I think about creativity for my team, we're covering construction, utility, supply chain, smart cities, things like that. And so the topics can feel kind of heavy or really technical, and also they're really important. It's how people are getting their electricity or how buildings are being built safely. So there's also this sort of feeling like we want to take it seriously and give the content the respect it's due. And so sometimes that is a little bit, can feel like it's at war with creativity, even if it's not really. So how do we balance it, that doing that more serious technical content with creativity? It's a lot of trial and error.
And Kate, do you find that the clients that you work with have that appetite for experimentation?
I think some do, for sure. I think everyone is in a different space in their content marketing journey and education. And so I think a lot of where we can support is in the education and explaining why we would try something. Having good partners is always a good place to be in terms of getting to that trial and error.
Nice. And Travis, you mentioned something interesting about that kind of line of specificity versus generality in kind of approaches of content. I would love to hear what you think about walking that line, because it is a fine line to walk.
There's kind of this balance between creating this really broad focused content, for instance, everyone talking about the supply chain during the pandemic and how that kind of ecosystem broke down. And then the really specific content that is maybe seen or searched by less people, but has a higher rate of conversion. So, things that your particular business decision maker cares about when it comes to pricing or implementation around a certain product. And so with B2B marketing in particular, you have to really walk the line between, is this a topic that's going to get a lot of eyeballs on my product? Does that matter? Is it going to be people who are going to eventually convert and buy that? Is this topic boring? Is it already been talked about a lot? And then the other side of that, maybe there's a topic that only 10 people search, but it's really valuable. Is that worth it for my business goals?
Yeah, I think I'm fortunate to work with a bunch of folks who are former journalists or come from that space of really reader service content. A lot of our partners understand and appreciate that. And so with that ethos of wanting something to be, brand neutral, but really a good resource for the audience is where we come at things from. And a lot of our success, I think, comes from the in-house expertise we have, but also leveraging and connecting with external folks who are just wonderful sources, having writers who are ex-electrical engineers or something like that, where they can really speak authentically and build that trust.
Yeah, I mean, you both are talking about process when it comes to creativity, which I really resonate with. I think there's this like false perception that creativity in the marketing space is chaos or it needs to be chaos. And then marketers come along and make it boring, kind of fit it into a funnel and a process. And it doesn't really have to be that. You can really make the argument that marketing in itself is creativity with purpose. You're kind of sitting down and saying, what does my audience want to do? What are they going to learn from the material I'm putting out there?
It goes down to trust and how well your brand is known and whether they see you as a credible, authoritative voice in the industry. So if I were to look for information or I was researching something, I would compare all the different sources and I would automatically go to the source that I trust, right? Not all experts are good at creating content, right? So it's up to content strategists or marketers to help the ideas to make sure that you're moving the conversation forward. You're elevating the category and you're highlighting those issues and topics that are really important to your core audience. Well, depends on the goal, right? So if you're trying to target everyone who's a potential buyer in a category, then you want to go broad, right? But if you're trying to build trust and credibility, then I think a more niche approach is the way to go. Instead of thinking about it in opposing terms, I would just reframe that as what kind of distinct perspective do you have on the topic?
One thing I think about too on the broad versus niche is what kind of resources do you have to achieve your content? Not everyone has great experts in-house who can speak really authentically to a super specific topic. That's fine. Don't do it. Like inauthentic piece of content, they can smell it a mile away. So don't go that road. Do something more broad. But, even if you have limited resources, you can repurpose a big rock piece of content for different audiences.
And Kate, you mentioned that inauthenticity, which I agree. If something reeks of inauthenticity, then we're going to skip it, right? So as a person who interacts with content a lot on a daily basis, what is your what's that thing that gives away that inauthenticity to you that would kind of make you X out of it, basically?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the vertical. And that's such an important part of it is having folks who can tell you that. Like, I'm not an expert on utilities. I'm not an expert on supply chain, but we have really great people on the team who are and can speak to that. I think word choice is so important. And that's something you don't know unless you know. And so I think that's a clear tip off. You see something in the headline that's, refers to something as the wrong term or, it might be grammatically correct and it's going to get past your copy editors, but if it's not authentic, it's going to turn people off in that 30 second attention span. It's going to be the first thing they close out of. So yeah, I would say think about your purpose. Why are you creating content? You don't want to get into a situation where you're just creating posts for the sake of creating blog posts to have fodder for social media. And be really thoughtful about why you're creating content. What need are you fulfilling, and what internal resources are you leveraging and highlighting? I would also say be really intentional about the conversations that you want to have. It's unlikely, like we've said. I wish we all had unlimited budgets. That would give a lot of space for creativity, but I've never seen that. So unlikely you're going to have those unlimited resources. You have to make some choices. So be intentional about it.
And Travis, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately brands are at a disadvantage. I think especially in the B2B space, a lot of surveys kind of show that product review sites, expert opinions, independent blogs tend to be the first places that decision makers go when they're thinking about a brand, thinking about your product. And so you have to do a lot of work, like we mentioned earlier, to kind of build that trust, to be as authentic as those independent sources of approval. The other side of it is being really strategic around the types of trends that you want to incorporate into your content, into your marketing work. And I try to break it up into 3 different categories for that. The first is really like table stakes. What are some of the trends or the topics rather that are always going to be important to your decision maker no matter what? Then there's this other category around like bandwagon topics. These are the things that every other company wants to talk about. It's really popular right now, but they're probably going to become super saturated around that discussion very quickly, and it's going to burn out. And the last one is really like the sweet spot, and that is kind of the predictors, like the crystal ball, if you will, of what's going to be the big trend 3 to 6 months from now. It's a hard thing to capture, but if you're able to do that, you're able to lead the conversation around a certain topic that your decision maker is concerned about before everyone else, and really be the trendsetter in that space.
And Kate, just when you mentioned before, the idea of, budgets and being confined with the creativity, I actually also think creativity flourishes within boundaries because, if you think about it, creativity is just a problem-solving endeavor. And then Travis, I just love the framework that you put together. That's a really efficient way of identifying those key conversations. I think I read, an executive study somewhere that talked about how decision makers in B2B really want content that challenge their thinking rather than just, validating their assumptions. And I think as professionals ourselves, we can relate to that, can't we?
I have a question for you guys on especially like the balance of emotional versus rational in storytelling. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle to hit, especially with B2B audiences, right? Because there's like a rational mind element of that. But where do you think like that emotional side comes in, and how do you kind of balance that? Lil, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that all content should serve both the emotional and rational parts of your brain, right? It just depends on where you want to focus on. And I think that the most effective campaigns and content has always been something that makes you feel something. But I would say that at all times you can appeal to both. And if you had to prioritize, I would go the emotional creative route always.
That's ignored a lot too on the B2B side. I know, Lo, we talk about this a lot, but thinking about B2B decision makers as individuals, not as some kind of like emotionless entity, right? These are people who care about their jobs and their growth and kind of innovating in their space. And especially as B2B decision makers get younger and kind of represent that millennial and Gen Z demographic, you're seeing more people who care about proving themselves in the space, around innovating, around kind of working with brands that they can trust and have this larger kind of purpose-driven mission behind.
Yeah, B2B is deeply personal, right? It's high stakes. It's your career here. So yeah, I would totally agree with that, Trav.
Yeah, I think even the way we talk about B2B content, I mean, it's pain points. It's what's keeping executives up at night, and they're not up at night because they are robots who don't care about what's going on at work, right? It's emotional. It's solving those concerns that are affecting their feelings. So I think it's definitely something you want to pursue when doing B2B content.
Lil, let's hear from you first on this.
I think creativity comes down to really being confident and knowing your subject matter, right? And so you should be looking for those topics and conversations that you have that ability to lead, right? And that will actually deliver value to your audience. We call these ownable conversations, right? And it's a framework that we've developed to really identify what are those 2-3 conversations that your brand has a natural ability to own that will build that credibility, that reputation, deliver value to your audience, and in the end give you that upper hand when it comes to the competitive landscape.
So Lil, what does the execution of ownable conversations actually look like?
Great. I think a great example came from GE, which is their Balance the Equation campaign. And the ownable conversation there was balancing the gender inequality in STEM roles in the STEM industry as a whole. It was a brilliant campaign. There was a lot of different executions, everything from TVCs to social. And there was even a economic impact study commissioned. So I think it was great because it delivered two things. First of all, it showed G's commitment to innovation and progress, but it also delivered on a business goal, which was to build a desirable employer brand and to attract new talent. So that's one of my favorite campaigns.
So in theory, we can all agree on this, but in practice, this is so much harder. I think we're conditioned to echo our own value props as brands. So Kate, how do you go about convincing brands to step outside their comfort zone and do something like an Ownable conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. I think having data to back up your approach is really helpful, whether that's how you're measuring the success of your trial and error. I think having a strong partnership with the brand is important to having that trust. And I think it's having a good idea too. Like for instance, I worked with a window manufacturer in the past, and I knew the audience we were speaking to was really interested in seeing failures, like seeing things fall apart, seeing like mold on the inside of windows and crumbling houses, and that's not something brands always love to be associated with. But in this case, we positioned it as this window manufacturer is an expert in the space. They know what installation techniques can be used to prevent mold and how contractors can implement them to protect their business, prevent callbacks. And that was a really successful campaign. And I'm really appreciative that brand placed their trust in us and trusted the data that we had showing what the audience really wanted.
Lil, let's start off with you for this.
I think it's simply answering two key questions. The first is, what value is your brand delivering to the industry, to the community, and to your audience, right? And then the second is all about what's happening in the industry. What are those big shifts? What are the key challenges? What's happening in terms of the cultural themes? And so, in marketing, we all love a good Venn diagram. Those ownable conversations I mentioned before really sit in that intersection between, what the brand value is and what those, cultural shifts, or, we call them the cultural zeitgeist. And that's where you really need to concentrate on if you want to find your ownable conversations.
And I would go one step further too. And, Lil's talking a lot about that external value, what you kind of bring as a brand, what the industry is talking about. Also take a look at what your competitors are doing. How do they talk about certain topics in the industry? How do they go about it? What's their perspective? What are they kind of missing? And then spend some time going internal, talk to your sales team, talk to your customer support folks, really get to understand their perception of your audience, how you think the audience perceives your brand, and what you think some of those biases are that you can kind of bring into your work.
Travis, let's hear from you on this.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a very basic response, but are people sharing the content? And what I mean by that is, are experts in the space reposting what you're saying? Are they using it on social to elevate their own platform? That's a really good sign if you see other experts using your content to fuel conversations, that you've picked the right one.
So my answer is going to be completely unscientific. I think it should feel really natural for you to own it. Like, you should feel, yes, that's the topic that I want to talk about, and you should have a lot to say about it, right? Because you want it to give you enough space to talk about a variety of things. And then secondly, it's about the audience's reaction to it. If they're responding well to this, is probably the science in it. If they're responding well to it, then you'll see that in your engagement rates, right? In your page, your traffic, your page views. And they want to hear more from you. That's the most validating thing that you can get, is that, sense that, oh, okay, what I'm saying has relevance to the audience that I'm trying to target. And that to me means that you're on the right track and you have the right ownable conversations.
This is like really the rational versus the emotional here. Yeah, for sure. You can, there's data and there's page views and all the things you can look at, for sure. But I love, Lil, what you're saying about it should feel natural to own it. You should want to say a lot of things, and that gives you fodder to create the content. The other piece about the metrics is sort of understanding the difference between a ton of eyeballs and reaching the right folks. You can create a really niche topic that only reaches a few people, but maybe they're the exact right people for that particular content. There's someone on my team who put together a really in-depth piece on I think it was industrial food manufacturing equipment, and it performed well. But also, one of the folks who reached out to them afterward was a NASA engineer who wanted to learn more about how this food manufacturing equipment could support, space, as far as I can tell. So that's a great eyeball to have.
Lil, what do you think about that?
I think it's just simply having a willingness to have a point of view. Like, you can't be innovative if you're saying the same things as everyone else, and you're not, you're not willing to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, and I think it's also around like having something proprietary to share. Like, what's a piece of data that you can tell in your storytelling that only you possess? How do you set yourself apart as someone who has the information those stakeholders want, and kind of use that to build the relationship as time goes on?
I love both of those. And I would add, really show off your niche expertise. You're really, as a brand, you're probably very familiar with what those trends are. So become deeply familiar, really entrenched in it, carve out your lane, and then apply those journalistic approaches to create content that is really valuable and a great resource for your audience.
So people think creativity is totally spontaneous, but there is a formula you can rely on. Ownable Conversations is one way to do that, but there's always additional avenues. Well, that is all the time we've got for today. I just wanted to say a major thank you to our special guest, Kate Light, for joining us. And thanks, as always, to our experts, Lil and Travis. If you are interested in learning more about studioID's Ownable Conversations, I'll post a couple links for you below. And also, if you're really trying to get that industry perspective and those niche kind of zeitgeist moments that are happening, we do have our audience snapshots that just came in, and I will also post those in the links below. And also be sure to watch this space as we continue to explore more of the big questions shaping the marketing industry today.
Yeah, and we're always looking for insights into those questions, the next big kind of debate we want to tackle. So keep those conversations going with us by tweeting your brand demand questions, best practices, and experiences at studio_ID.
That's officially a wrap for episode 2. Thanks again for joining us, and see you next time.